Hello everyone, I'm Legally Lyra. Welcome to my channel. Recently, an Our Hollow Knight poster asked for everyone's hot takes, and I provided mine. That Radiance is not the bad guy of the story. I expected some pushback, but I was a little surprised by how one-sided that pushback was. As far as I could see, virtually no one spoke up in agreement. Commenters pointed out how Radiance was turning helpless bugs into zombies, so no matter what had happened to her in the past, she lost her right to claim to be a victim. And I think that's a fair criticism. But I also think the issue is a little bit more complicated than that. So, if you'll allow me, I would like to submit to you my full argument as to why I think Radiance is not the villain of this story. Hopefully, you'll find it an interesting exercise in perspective-taking, but just maybe it will change the way you see our brilliant lady of the softest floof. And villainy in general. As always, spoilers ahead. In a previous Hollow Knight video, I pointed out the similarities between the Radiance and Taka, the apparent villain/antagonist of Disney's Moana. Taka, for those that don't know, is actually Te-Fiti, a nurturing nature goddess, who has had her heart stolen by Maui, and only by having that heart returned to her is she able to recover and stop her reign of destruction. What Taka shows us is that even the most terrifying and destructive of monsters may have their genesis in the misdeeds of someone else. Women and matronly figures in general, like Te-Fiti, may have no choice but to turn to violence when they have lost all that matters to them. Still, being a Disney movie, Moana does smooth out some of the complexities here. We know that Moana's island is saved before the corruption of Taka consumes it, but how many other islands may have been destroyed before Te-Fiti is restored? Sounds like a film theory in the making to me. Get on it, theorists. My point, though, is that while it's easy enough to place the blame for a dangerous threat on the person who created that threat, rather than the threat itself, we do still have to hold people accountable for their actions. As many others have said, our traumas are not our fault, but dealing with them is our responsibility. If I get dumped by a really cruel woman, then go on to hurt someone else over it, I'm still responsible for that pain. If Te-Fiti destroyed other islands while she was Taka, she's still responsible for those deaths. And if Radiance kills or infects thousands of innocent bugs because of her victimization, she's still responsible for their suffering. But here's my question to all of you. Does that make her the villain? Now, I know this may seem obvious, but bear with me here as we consider a few similar examples. Mother Gothel from Disney's Tangled, and Alma Madrigal from Disney's Encanto. Yes, I'm going heavy with Disney. Deal with it. They're great movies. Now, Mother Gothel is obviously the villain of her story, while Alma Madrigal, the grandmother and matron of the Madrigal family, is obviously not. Nevertheless, both women hurt the people around them while doing what they think is best. What makes Gothel the villain, from a narrative sense, is that she is not only acting from a purely selfish standpoint, but that she is the architect of the misfortunes facing both her and Rapunzel. She chooses to kidnap Rapunzel as a baby purely to serve her own interests, and we feel no sympathy for her when she is defeated at the end of the movie. Or at least, I sure didn't. She is capable of playing the victim when she wants to, but it is all part of a series of cynical, calculating moves to achieve her goals. Alma Madrigal, on the other hand, is trying her best to preserve the family and the town, and while that has its own selfish motivation, her desire to honor the memory of her lost husband, she ultimately adapts her viewpoint to be more inclusive, to the benefit of all. The strife between her and Mirabel isn't a conflict of antithetical goals, nor a triumphant battle to be won, but a tragedy that, thankfully, is able to be resolved peacefully. The real villain, if there can even be said to be one, is the generational trauma created by war and death. That is a villain that can't be defeated at large, but can be defeated in the hearts of the characters as they work together to heal as a family. But what if they couldn't even do that? Consider for a moment an alternate timeline for Encanto. What if Alma Madrigal and Mirabel never reconciled, and Alma tightened her grip on the family? In this grittier alternative vision, we can see how Mirabel or one of her sisters might need to directly combat this generational trauma. What if Alma took to using violence to enforce her views on proper family behavior, and it became necessary to physically overpower her? Well, this would be incredibly tragic, first of all, but that's actually my point. In a situation like this, even when Alma would clearly be in the wrong and need to be stopped, that doesn't make her a villain. The villain is still the trauma of war itself, and the festering pain and wounds on the soul that it causes. Alma is no longer just a victim of that trauma, but she also doesn't stop being a victim of it either. She becomes an antagonist, yes. Arguably, she already is one. But I think calling her a villain would be going a step too far. And with that in mind, I'd like to take a closer look at another matron who lost her heart, the Radiance herself. In the beginning, the Radiance was born of the dream. But without a host of dreamers to witness the dream was devoid of purpose. Thus did Radiance beget the Mothkin, those feathered buds who dreamt of golden brilliant light, spending their entire lives in devoted reverence of this blazing vision. And for a time, they were happy, the dreamers and their god of dream. But then there came a pale worm, which, at the end of its life, rebirthed itself as a new type of being, one the land had never seen before. A king. With help from the White Lady of the Root, this pale king added a new element to the tapestry of dream: mind. His beacon tried to outshine the Radiance, and from her the dreamers were lured, until almost all of them had forgotten she even existed. Her love was taken from her by an interloper in her land. But when she tried to take them back, to reclaim the people she had created, mothered, and adored, a war began. A war that led to her being locked away in a cage, only able to reach out through the vile orange creation known as infection, all in a desperate attempt to once again touch the minds of her beloved. This is the most optimistic view of the Radiance I can present, given the standard textual interpretations. Clearly, by the time the knight arrives in Hallownest, Radiance is acting as an antagonist, being the one whose infection is ravaging the kingdom and the lands beyond. But if we dig a little deeper, we can clearly see that the wheels of her antagonism were set spinning by the machinations of the Pale King, whose desires and priorities are, in my opinion, highly suspect. We know that he tamed the savage souls of the bugs and beasts by giving them the gift of mind, though, obviously, bugs outside of Hallownest and even in the barren wastes have some degree of mind of their own, given the existence of Farloom and the Stormlands. But is that necessarily a good thing? The society created by the Pale King was clearly rife with inequality and corruption. Just look at the Soul Sanctum, or the feast halls littered with the corpses of other bugs. But more importantly, we have to consider how the Pale King reacts to the Radiance's initial emergence as a competitor to his domain. After disrupting a peaceful equilibrium, the Pale King is prepared for the blowback. Instead of trying to make a deal with the Radiance, he doubles down in trying to take everything from her. In his own words, no blazing kin. Only one light shall shine against the dark. And how does he do this?
Total, unadulterated genocide.
Well, more like mass infanticide. Nevertheless, the point remains. The Pale King refuses to make peace with the Radiance, and instead sires thousands upon thousands of children, almost all of whom are cast off as imperfect, left to die and linger as shades for eternity in the abyss. And the one child that survived was doomed to be in eternal prison. The Hollow Knight and the Radiance, trapped with each other forever, until one broke the other. Did the Pale King really believe that the Hollow Knight felt nothing? The memories in the Path of Pain suggest otherwise, but he made the sacrifice anyway. No cost too great, he says. But what cost is he really paying, as opposed to the cost his children and his people must pay? He claims this is in order to make Hallownest last eternal, but even if that's true, even if this isn't just a massive ego trip for him, Queen Vespa rightly asserts that nothing can truly last forever, and that to try to do so is a recipe for disaster. Had he only lowered his own ambitions, none of the horrors that followed would have been necessary. I submit to you that there is a villain in Hollow Knight, and it is none other than the Pale King himself. Now, many of you may not like that. The Pale King is already dead by the time the game begins. How can a dead bug be the villain? Well, in the same way that generational trauma can be the villain, or the marginalization of a demigod. In my view, the villain of a story is the force that has made things wrong, against which the heroes work to make things right. Thinking of a villain as some bad guy you can punch in the face, thus saving the day, is overly simplistic and not reflective of how actual conflicts function. Seeing an antagonist as a villain can be dehumanizing, or, in this case, I guess, debuganizing? Let's say reductive. Seeing an antagonist as automatically a villain can be reductive, causing you to miss the bigger picture of the story being told, and making it more likely that more such antagonists will arise in the future. Of course, many people want that outcome. Having simple bad guys you can fight and defeat is a comforting narrative in these trying times. But I want to push back on that even harder. What if Radiance is not only not a villain, but not even a true antagonist? What if the infection wasn't even caused by the Radiance, but by the Pale King instead? Admittedly, this next segment is going a little bit away from standard lore and a little bit deeper into speculation, but I hope you'll bear with me and consider this little thought experiment. It begins with a simple question. Why did the Pale King imprison the Radiance? The standard explanation is that she was infecting the bugs of Hallownest, and he saw the use of the Hollow Knight as the preferred solution for stopping her. But how do we know that she was infecting them? To my mind, the clearest evidence for this is the Pale King's litany during the knight's ascent out of the abyss, where he says, "You shall seal the blinding light that plagues their dreams." The word plague is associated with infection, so it's natural to assume that by plagues their dreams, the Pale King means infects them. But what if that's not it? We already know the Pale King has a sibling rivalry-esque issue with Radiance, wanting to be the only light that wards off the darkness. What if the Radiance was merely visiting the bugs in their dreams, making them waver in their devotion to the Pale King? What if the quote-unquote plague was simply an excuse? Consider a few more lore tablets. In the City of Tears, the memorial statue says of the Hollow Knight, "Through its sacrifice, Hallownest lasts eternal." Could it really be possible that the only threat to the kingdom's eternity was the Radiance? That even after the Pale King absconded to his own private dream realm, his lingering power alone would be enough to keep the kingdom lasting forever? I think not. I think instead that he captured the Radiance within the Hollow Knight to use as a battery. That her unending fury at being contained became a perpetual motion machine, channeled through the bindings of the Black Egg Temple and into the soil of Hallownest itself, granting eternal life to its occupants. As one final piece of evidence, I give to you the lore tablet within the Black Egg. It says, "Vessel, though bound, you shall know the state of the world. Hallownest will be whole again." Whole, not healed. The Radiance was not an infection before, but a competing influence. A potential source of disunity and civil war, but only because of the Pale King's obsessive need for total control of his people. Only after Radiance was bound did her fury become the infection. Only after the Pale King left her with no other choice. But hey, that's just a theory. A game theory! But in all seriousness, I realize that what I just said might seem a little outlandish. Nevertheless, I think it's an important reminder that stories are not always as simple as they seem, and that our perspective as a reader or player of those stories can deeply limit our understanding of the truth due to biases that arise naturally from the story's framing. Maybe the Radiance had killed half the kingdom before she was sealed away. Maybe the Mothkin were suffering under her thrall. Or maybe my theory is right, and her only crime was offering the bugs of Hallownest another option before she was driven completely insane by centuries of solitary confinement. The point is, we can't be 100% certain. We don't fully know. And that doubt has to give us pause. Radiance may be the antagonist, but she is not the villain. So, why does any of this matter? Should we just overlook all of Radiance's crimes because she has gloofs so soft you take no contact damage? Should we blame the Pale King and all of his followers, condemning the entire civilization of Hallownest? Probably not, but that's really up to you. I'm not here to tell you what moral stance to land on. Not when it comes to video games, anyway. Instead, I want to use this as an opportunity to encourage everyone to examine their biases when it comes to narrative. It is so easy to digest the narratives we're fed without question, especially when those narratives position us as the hero. If Radiance is the villain, then the Knight is the quote-unquote good guy. and we all want to be the good guy. But I believe the reality is more complex than this, and that it does all of us good to practice seeing that complexity in games as a safe way of improving our ability to do so in real life. One way or another, Radiance still needs to be dealt with. Regardless of who created the situation, her infection is a real threat to the bugs of Hallownest now and in the future. But having to stop a violent antagonist doesn't necessarily make that situation right or good. An ex-military friend of mine has said, "By the time violence is necessary, someone has already messed up." And it usually isn't the people doing the violence, but rather the people who created the circumstances that made it seem like the best option. The one comment on my aforementioned Reddit post that didn't outright disagree with me had this to say: "I don't think Hollow Knight is really a story meant to have good guys and bad guys. It's just tragic. Looking for a bad guy to hate on is an easy way to justify violence and ultimately trying not to feel bad about it. And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say we should feel bad about playing violent video games. I love Hollow Knight for all its hack-and-slash glory. But I do think it's worth practicing a little empathy for the victims of a far grander scheme than we can initially conceive. At least every once in a while." Also, primal aspids are not only not badly designed, they are the best enemy in the game, and in this essay, I will... Thanks so much for watching this video, everyone. I'm trying to learn a little bit more about video production each time, so I hope you'll let me know how I'm doing and what I can work on next time. My apologies for the audio quality. I have lost the microphone that I used in the last one. Please share your thoughts and reactions in the comments, and consider liking and subscribing. If you have a video you'd like to see, please feel free to let me know in the comments. Also, I would be ever so honored if you would consider supporting me on Patreon, or checking out my Amazon author page for some queer and trans sci-fi. Both links are in the description. Until next time, my lovelies, my name is Legally Lyra, and I bid you adieu.